Yo, 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 guess who's back? Well, obviously it's me and it's my channel. So then, Oppenheimer. Now, it's been a really long time coming doing this review, and I want to apologize. One of you, I think your YouTube name is like Opeo, something like that, and you actually requested me to do this review back when the film was coming out, and I'd love to have seen it then, but I just haven't had the time. So I'm doing it now because I've seen it now. Finally, I didn't have the time then to watch the film. So I'm kind of excited to do this review because this is such a massive movie. It's something that this and Barbie, it's a phenomenon to have these two things. They're not really rivals, let's be fair. All's fair in art. It's not war. It is just art, right? That's cinema. So I'm pretty sure that both filmmakers of both films wanted each other to be successful, I would hope. And that's one of the nice things about cinema is we get to watch somebody like Oppenheimer and it's only a movie, even though it's not. And that's maybe one of the reasons it's so significant, because it's a man who is responsible for the atomic bomb, which is the most devastating weapon in history. And the brutality. Here's an interesting thing, right? And I didn't even think about this. Do you see up there? See where my finger is if I move it? That little plane, that is a paper aeroplane, okay? And that paper aeroplane was given to me by a Japanese man who survived the Hiroshima bombing, okay? He made it, and it actually says on it, if I take it out of the frame, which I'm not planning to, it says like "Wings for Peace," which he wrote on it. And it was astonishing to meet a man who survived Hiroshima. And I've got quite an interest in that topic, have done since I first knew about it, whenever I first learned that. And I've got to say, one thing about Oppenheimer, I guess this isn't that linear, but one little criticism, and I'll go into what's good about it, but one little criticism is the devastation of Hiroshima and Nagasaki is so extreme that the film made a point of not really showing that, which is okay. I completely respect a director's decision to say this thing happened so far away that these scientists were like hearing about it via the radio and maybe news reports, and it wasn't like the internet could just show them the bomb going off in Japan. So I kind of get that they were having to imagine the level of devastation right off the bat. But there is a sequence, I guess this is a spoiler, I don't know, you needn't watch this review if you haven't seen the film, but there is a scene where Oppenheimer's giving this kind of celebratory speech of "we did it," and it intercuts where he's hearing the sound of bombs, the bomb, and the people applauding him, he's kind of seeing them as if they're in a bomb. And there's one bit where you see this woman and she has like her skin is peeling, and I did think it's one of the only significant kind of criticisms in terms of that in the film, but I was like, that really is not a good depiction at all. It looks like, when a woman wears a face mask before bed or something, where she's putting on her face mask to look pretty, and it's one of those ones where you like peel it to give her a better beauty complexion, right? That's what it looked like that was peeling off this woman's face. And that's shit, to be honest, because it's like, you're talking about an atomic bomb, right? If you're going to depict melting skin, it would be so horrific. I mean, I highly recommend, though it's a hard watch, there's a film called Barefoot Gen. This is an animated film from Japan, and even the guy who gave me that plane recommended it, though I'd already seen it. But Barefoot Gen is a very vivid depiction of that bomb going off, and it's a very hard film to watch. Even though it's animated, it's traumatic. But there's a second one, and I recommend watching both, and the second one has a lot of optimism, and it's a very beautiful film. Anyway, that's the one thing I really didn't didn't like. I thought if you're gonna don't show it at all, or if you're gonna show it, you have to show it kind of how it was, more horrific. Anyway, here's the thing about the film that's good and bad. In fact, forget that for a second. We'll get to that. We'll get to that later. I want to talk about, because this is a true story, that there was a real tragedy in this man's life, I felt, which is that this man was so brilliant, and it talks about him being kept awake at night with images of life at the molecular level, the world, the universe at the molecular level, and him being able to think about light and how it travels and whether it's straight or in waves, and the opening of the film, the first like 20 minutes or half an hour, I'd say before Matt Damon's character comes in, it feels almost like a slightly different film. Before Matt Damon comes in, it feels a bit more Hollywood, I felt, when he came in, just tonally, because you stopped getting the vast images of space and of stars exploding and of supernovas, and there's these great descriptions of how gravity sucks light, and you see it and it looks phenomenal, and however they did it, it's shot on film and it looks fantastic, and those bits were really great, and they did lend itself to the reality that this man had this phenomenal brain and this incredible ability to create. Okay, but the tragedy I felt was in a way that he was discovering what he discovered during the Second World War, and that he was in a circumstance where the financing he was getting for his thinking meant that he was then used to create the most devastating weapon that the world has ever known. A weapon with potentially the power to destroy all life as we know it. Maybe not one bomb, but a number of them, And Michio Kaku, the Japanese American scientist, has talked about this, how he's said we can literally destroy all life on Earth now, and that includes the insects, and it's just, what a horrific thing for any man to have a responsibility for. And I felt like that was a real tragedy, because there's Carl Sagan, the great scientist, said that the duality of the universe, and this is, it's not a direct quote, but he essentially said life is very much about duality. The universe is about duality. So there's light and there's dark, and there's up and there's down, and there's left and there's right, and there's hot and there's cold, right? And there's male and there's female, and there's all these opposing forces all the time. And it's impossible. Well, what he essentially said is the fact that we have the ability to destroy the world, the ultimate chaos, also means that we have the ability to save it and create the ultimate peace. So you have two roads that you can walk down as a collective. And Oppenheimer, it seems to me that he in a way had the power to do both. But it's like, what if he'd not been, imbued with this brilliance during the Second World War? What if he'd been around a different group of people and been encouraged in a different way, and used his understanding to have started to develop technologies which NASA and other future scientists have done. They've looked into ways of feeding everyone on Earth, and they've been very successful. You don't hear about it much, but it was this is all relevant. But NASA were like, well, if we're going to send people to space, we have to feed them in space. How do we do that? So they worked out ways to grow crops in space, and therefore they were like, well, if we can grow crops in space, we can grow crops in the desert. So all of this was tested and experimented and successful. So it's like, well, then we can feed everybody on Earth. And this is a big subject, which I guess is off the subject of the film a bit. But the point is still that power is tragic, to think that brain was used predominantly for destruction, the greatest form of destruction the world has ever known. And the film even took a turn once it all becomes essentially military. And it's like, now we're going to create a bomb that is going to kill 250,000 people. Innocent people. I mean, they weren't dropping it on the military. Dropping it on women, children, fathers. So that's pretty tough anyway. But I can't help but think about what if he'd just been around different people, different scientists, and a different time period? What if it hadn't been a time of war? And then of course his conscience said, I think this will bring about peace, but we all know that when somebody like a child with a toy is like, well, what else can the toy do? Can it do this? There is an element of that, which I think we all, that's a curse of man in itself. Now, when it comes to the filmmaking, Christopher Nolan, there are certain things he does so well. So first of all, it looks really beautiful, and that's just his 65. It said 65mm film at the end, but I thought it was 70. But he always shoots on film. So for anyone who doesn't know, most films nowadays are shot digitally, like our phone cameras, but better. And from the dawn of film, it used to be on film, and him and Quentin Tarantino, I think, are the only two people who still shoot on film, a negative. A positive, but the film negative, right? Which is a positive. But anyway, so it looks great, and film looks beautiful, and his stuff always looks beautiful. But there is a kind of, I've often, like, people go nuts for Christopher Nolan, although I don't know anyone personally who does, but critics seem to be like, he's the greatest ever. But his films always have a certain, and not to over criticize, but it sort of feels like a 3-hour trailer. And there's a point where I do criticize directors for having an inability to shift tones. M. Night Shyamalan, who I actually think is underrated as a director, said that one of the things he looks for in a director is tone. A director who's able to sustain a tone, right? Because a director doesn't know what they're going for, it will just be a mess, right? But someone like Shyamalan, it's very clear when you go Unbreakable, Signs, The Village, they all have that's his tone. But he's also able to inject humour into scary stuff or serious stuff or slow stuff. It's still like, it can be a mishmash. It can be scary, funny, serious, meaningful all at once. And I think the best directors all do that. Spielberg, who's considered like the child of Hollywood in a way, because he makes child-friendly movies, family movies, and even his big ones, sort of minus Private Ryan, I guess, can be sort of family accessible. But Spielberg is the same. It's like, it can be exciting, scary, funny, all at once. Kubrick gets underrated for that. People say it's just one serious tone, but it isn't. Dr. Strangelove is a comedy, and in a Full Metal Jacket, it's like war, and it's terrifying, and it's thrilling, and it's psychological, and yet it's also got these kind of iconic things like I Love You Long Time, which people have been quoting ever since. Like, it's still a mixture. But Christopher Nolan, and Tarantino too, obviously, they're like comedies, but they're not comedies, right? So it's still a mix. But Nolan is like one note, one tone from start to finish. And it can be super engaging for like the first half hour to 40 minutes. And you're locked in, like you would a really good film trailer. But then after like 40 minutes, it's sort of like, it starts to feel a bit bitty. Like, we are just catching segments here, and the tone never shifts, and there's no levity, there's no humor, and it sort of needs a little bit of, there's something called it's been kind of studied, and it's a term called a pattern disrupt. Okay, so a pattern disrupt is, let's say I'm talking to you, and it's all sort of normal, and then I go like that, and you're like, what? And suddenly you're just, you're engaged because the tone shifted. You weren't quite expecting it. Or suddenly I go down. Oh my, what? Huh? Right. The point is the tone shifts, and that's a pattern disrupt that becomes engaging for a viewer. And Nolan, I kind of feel like what he's got going for him is great cinematography, like beautiful cinematography. It's not even like, it's not super, it's not like Orson Welles, where there's a lot of meaning in his imagery, but it's beautiful. And then he's got this fantastic music, which plays from start to finish. But it feels a bit like a formula. Great visuals, great music, and when the music runs over the top, and we've got like old-fashioned stuff, but modern music, which is a kind of interesting combination, it becomes very engaging. But it's like, if you remove the music from the film, and I kept thinking about this, if this film didn't have any music, would it really be that good? Would it be that engaging? And it really, I don't think it would. And that's not to say it's not good, because I know Christopher Nolan knows going in how it's going to feel. He wants the complete picture. He doesn't want you to see it without music. But I still feel like these characters should be able to speak without without music, and the script alone should be engaging enough for it to be good. Kind of like a stage play. Now let's get off that for a sec, because I'm being a bit critical here. And I did really like the film. It's a really good film. It's a significant film. It's got great moments. It's got, for my money, too many celebrities, because every 5 minutes someone else is coming and it's like, what movie is he from? What TV show is he in? Where's it? Like, they're everyone, every extra is a celebrity in this movie. It's just like someone's in the background and you're like, that's as famous, but I thought it was too many people, but it was like good. It was still good. It was exciting. It was so exciting. It had some very exciting moments, especially when they first test the bomb, and some great directorial choices. But I suppose the significance of the story is so big that it's hard to just not discuss its true story and separate that from the film. Does that make sense? It's like taking World War II and if there's a movie about World War II, well, it's still a topic worth discussing. And the fact that Nolan brought it out, he didn't have to make the greatest film in the world. The fact that he's given us something worth thinking about is testament, I suppose, to his film. Whether or not it's a phenomenal film, it doesn't kind of have to be. There were a couple other things that were kind of, I was thinking about Cillian Murphy, who I liked a lot. And I'm going to chuck in that I actually met Cillian Murphy once. Some people say it's called Cillian Murphy, Cillian Murphy. I don't even know, even though I met him. But I had an unusual eventuality where I literally nearly got crushed by a horse. And he saw it, and it was on a film. And I had to jump out of the way of this horse, and I actually somersaulted by pure adrenaline. And he came over to me, and he checked that I was alright, and he was a very nice person. He was really cool, and he like patted me on the shoulder, and he was like, I can't believe, he's like, that was amazing. And he said, I said, you know, I was a bit in shock, to be honest. And he was like, well, it's all on celluloid, you know, that made this movie. It's going to go in. And the film that I was working on never came out. That's another story, but he was the lead in that film. Or one of, I think, 2 leads. But the film did so poorly in its test screenings, not his fault, that the studio decided to shelve it and it never came out. And that was quite a long time ago. And I remember feeling quite bad for all the people involved. And I often thought he's really good. He should get more front stage work in a way. Like he's often, even Christopher Nolan has put him in other films, and he's not often at the forefront. And I thought it was really good to see him be the lead in a film that's massive and actually came out, unlike the one that the studio shelved. And I thought he was really good, and I thought he had a lot of weight to carry. But I also thought, similar to what I said about Christopher Nolan, like there wasn't much room for. There was a lot of room for something in the performance to not be the same all the way through. That he didn't have to get, if the real guy didn't get angry and he didn't this and he didn't that, then that's fine. But I still thought to engage an audience, there could have been a bit more variety in that performance by around midway through. And to give you an example, the film begins with him injecting fucking cyanide into his teacher's apple. And I was like, Jesus Christ, like, that's a weird character move, isn't it? I don't know if that really happened. I did think, if that didn't happen, that's bloody stupid. That's a proper Christopher Nolan thing to put in a movie. Similar to in The Dark Knight, when a guy pulls out a gun in a courtroom, fires it, doesn't work, and Harvey Dent looks at the gun and says, made in China, next time, buy American. It's like, that's so dumb. What are the chances of that ever happening? Pulling out a gun in court, that's dumb. Doesn't work, that's dumb. Made in China, that's dumb. You know, to have it say it like that, and then next time buy American, that's dumb. Like, all these things, they engage an audience, but they're all dumb. They're just writing flaws as far as I'm concerned. And then I was like, if the real Oppenheimer didn't inject his teacher's apple with cyanide, then to just stick it in to make it entertaining is like, you didn't need to do that to make the performance interesting. But you could have done something else. Just something to just mix it up a bit. Now, moving to the latter half of the film takes a shift. And I have to talk about this. I know this is a bit of a scrambled review, but it's a scrambled topic. You know, I'm trying to review the reality and a film at the same time. So the film takes a shift and it starts to become culturally relevant, or just relevant to the times we live in. And it feels suddenly like Christopher Nolan's now doing a commentary on power and social media. And it's a fascinating turn. The film does get a bit convoluted in terms of its narrative. It feels a bit like the last 15 minutes of the third Batman he made, for like an hour, where you're like, it's jumping back and forth through time and people are explaining stuff that you kind of half understand and don't fully understand, and it's like the movie is a bit ahead of you, sometimes too much, like you're not always with it. But then it essentially, you start to get, okay, so this is a court and he's being falsely accused of being a communist, and all it really is Oppenheimer, the character, is so powerful and so influential to the world and the people that any opinion he has is an opinion people generally want to hear. But that is not what power wants. People in power are like, we don't want people to listen to this guy, we want people to listen to us. We want the president to be heard, not a rock star, right? I'm not saying he's a rock star, but that's the mindset. If Jimi Hendrix is playing guitar and says, yo, let's not go to Vietnam, millions of people will listen to that, and the president's like, we don't want some guy with a guitar to be listened to. I need to be listened to. Get rid of those. I'm not saying they get rid of Jimi Hendrix, but they're like, those people, we don't need them to have that much influence over the mass public. And that's a really interesting story, and I wasn't expecting it to go that way. And it's really hard to not think about people like Russell Brand, where it's like he's suddenly got massive influence over, I think his videos get about 1 million subs, 1 million views per video. I don't really watch them, to be honest. I used to watch Russell Brand when he was on Channel 4. But I understand that now he has influence and he can say whatever he wants. And sometimes very powerful people are like, no, you can't. And so it brings into question when he gets accused of stuff. And then you've got the Tate brothers, and it's like, they have mass influence and now they're accused of stuff. And it happens a lot. If you watch the Elvis movie made it very clear, fascinating, the story of Elvis Presley. And in that movie, the powers that be said to him, listen, you have so much influence over young people, it has to stop. And he's a young man himself. And they said, so here are your options. You go to war or you go to prison. Make a choice. Because you can't continue playing songs and telling girls, shaking your hips at girls and getting young people to want to sleep together. Too powerful, too influential. This is not the America we were after. So government steps in and goes, listen, you go to prison or you go to war. You go and be a soldier, but you can't carry on being a pop star because you thought it was a free country, but it ain't that free, right? Because we're still trying to maintain stuff. And that happens all the time. Happened to Muhammad Ali. You have a big mouth, big voice, big influence. Are you going to go to prison or are you going to go to war? Well, Elvis chose war and Muhammad Ali chose prison. And this movie is now going, here's the Oppenheimer side of that. And I wasn't expecting that. And I like the way it was handled. And I like its relevance. And I kind of think, I suppose the world's been like that for a long time. And social media is maybe making it more and more poignant. The film has an interesting line where Oppenheimer's wife says, do you think that just because you let them tie you with feathers, you got bullied by people more powerful than you, do you think that the world will essentially care about you in the future? And he's like, we'll see. There was an element, she keeps saying, why don't you fight? Why don't you fight? Why don't you fight? And the movie essentially is going, well, this is an opportunity for the world to try to see the real man, right? So we can see him and make up our own mind. But it's an interesting one because unlike the people I've just mentioned, like Muhammad Ali, who's a boxer, or Elvis, who's a singer, and we can go, okay, their names tried to get tarnished. Oppenheimer, and I'm going to say this, I thought this was a fault with the movie because we didn't see much of his celebrity. They said that he believed his celebrity would save him, but we didn't see much of that. I always got the impression watching the film that, I know I'm derailing, but like I said, there's a lot in my head here. But I always got the impression that the movie was kind of just showing he is ultimately just a pawn. And the military and the American government and even the president were like, we use his intelligence and then we get rid of him until we need him again. And that's it. Which was handled very well. And I think that's most likely very, very true. Is that he's like, so what's going to happen with this weapon I've created? And they're like, well, don't worry, it's in our hands now. And all major scientists today, not all, but most I've heard use the analogy of creating the atomic bomb is like giving guns to children. Or giving a gun to children. Because if an adult hands a handgun to a 4-year-old child, the 4-year-old child doesn't understand the gun, doesn't understand its potential, doesn't understand how dangerous it is. They just don't. So creating an atomic bomb and giving it to a bunch of cowboy politicians who aren't scientists and could never invent that thing is obviously, well, history has already said how that turned out. God, it's so interesting. I mean, it's such a big topic. Again, this is an aside, but if you haven't seen it, I really recommend the new Planet of the Apes trilogy because it's great. There's a little bit of comedy in the third one that I didn't really like. Speaking of tone, that was serious, and I love all the serious tone. But that movie, very cleverly, it kind of is a metaphor for the ascent of man. And there's a very clear part when the apes create weapons, and it perfectly kind of shows, well, what happens when the gun gets invented, because then the weakest can have power over all the rest. But the weakest isn't the one who was smart enough to think of the gun. It's just this weak one who's maybe mean and a bully can just take the gun off the person who was smart enough to invent it. And it shifts the whole power balance, because without that kind of weaponry, it really is the person who works hardest and is strongest and fittest and, does exercise and stuff. They have power. But then it's like, nope, just this guy who could get the weapon has power. And the atomic bomb is that on, like, I was going to say steroids, but it's more than steroids. So anyway, the point is it feels kind of like he was a pawn to an extent, Oppenheimer, but it also is like he you can't fully think that he was a heroic figure, because he did suffer from the weakness of his own curiosity and the weakness of seeing something through. And that is a very strange part of the human condition, that we all have this desire to see things through, especially men. A simple example that I think a lot of people can relate to is, let's say, hypothetically, that you're cleaning something, right? Let's say that you're cleaning like a banister, and you've got a sponge and you've got a water spray, and you're thinking, oh God, a different spray would be better than this. But you spray it and you just want to get it done, and you're cleaning that banister, and it's doing okay. But you know that it might take you 10 minutes to clean that banister with water, and it ain't going to be that good anyway. But if you had like a bleach spray or something, it would take you 1 minute. But once you've invested 5 minutes into doing it your way, you're going to finish it your way regardless. Like, a lot of people have that. Like, I've put in 5 minutes, I'm going to finish it, but there is a better way, and maybe I shouldn't do that. Or this is a better analogy, right? That's not a silly one. There is relevance to that. But here's a better one. People do this all the time. They're reading a book. They read 100 pages of a 500-page book and they don't like it. It's a bad 100 pages. It has not engaged them. They haven't enjoyed it. They've gotten kind of confused. But it's sort of getting somewhere, and they're like, I'm 100 pages in. I might as well just carry on, right? And then by the time they're 200 pages in, they're still not enjoying it. But they're like, I'm halfway through now, almost. I might as well get to the end. And it's like, so they do. And then in the end, they've read a 500-page book they didn't enjoy. And the smart move would have just been to stop reading it. All right, you gave it some time. You gave it 50, 60, 70 pages. Stop. It wasn't good. You didn't like it. Read something else. If the problem with doing that is you might not read another book ever again, because you just felt like you wasted your time. Reading's not for me, right? Or it puts you off for years, or it's just, you could have read 3 other books that you would have loved, that might have changed your life and brightened your life and inspired you and stimulated. But instead you read one, just because people have that thing like, but I've started it, I might as well just see it through to the end. And to me, that's part of the curse of like the human condition. And Oppenheimer had it like, well, I've started the project, I'll see it through. And then, of course, he started rationalizing and saying, well, it might bring about world peace. And I understand the logic of that, but it's still it might. He didn't have any certainty. As a scientist, he didn't say it's definitely gonna be a bomb that's gonna be so